Strategy and Analytics team. Tam, Vuong, and Jake Tolbert are here to introduce us to what they call exploring the fundraising progress and trend analysis dashboards, right? And there's a lot of interest on using different kinds of dashboards. I won't name any particular company or type. Some of you have encountered several ones, but if you've heard the word Tableau thrown around by a supervisor, that's an example. So today we are going to be learning about Tableau to transform dry monthly totals into information that fundraisers can readily use to both showcase performance and analyze operational strategies. Flexible filtering options will allow campus units to drill into their own data for key standardized metrics. And fundraising leaders can put away the calculators and find answers to the most common fundraising performance questions at their fingertips. If everyone, please, whether you are like showing yourself on video, want to clap, or want to use an emoji to actually welcome our presenters.
Thank you so much, Francesca. Let me share my screen and then we'll get started. All right, everyone can see my slides here? Great, thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. It's a Friday morning, so this is hopefully a good show and we'll get you ready for the weekend. Jake and I are with UDAR, as Francesca said. We're with the Information Strategy and Analytics team. And our team supports reporting and analytics for all fundraising and alumni relations across campus. As Francesca said, we are sharing a set of dashboards today that we basically have transformed, from dry kind of Excel-like, looking tables and charts into some dynamic dashboards. And our fundraisers are using now, these dashboards to monitor their performance, diagnose potential problem areas, and make changes based on these data. So we're really excited that we've been able to roll these out and see how much people are using them. So let's get into the agenda here. I won't say all of it, but ultimately we're going to be looking at some before and after, talk about backgrounds and purpose of the reports, dig into a little bit of details about what they are and what's behind them, and then talk about why we thought we needed these changes. Then we'll get to the demo, the good stuff will come in the middle. And then the stuff that you're all waiting for is talking about how we develop them. So Jake's gonna cover that. And then we'll get into some challenges and lessons learned and then questions and answers. But feel free, Shara is gonna be monitoring our chat box. So if you'd like to just pop questions in there as we go along, I think sometimes questions are better in context. So do feel free to do that. Okay, so let's get into this. We're talking about before, and not too long ago, this is what it looked like. All right, we had some Excel sheets. We ran many reports and fed them into Excel sheets so that we could get this lovely set of, as Nancy calls them, those, was it the green charts? I think she called them the green charts. I never knew what others called them. But this is what we had in about, pre-fiscal year 2016. And then we leveled up a little bit. We started using business objects to produce our reports. And so we did crosstabs that expanded our analyses to include other variables. So here you see donor types and transaction types. There's still fundraising progress data, but it's other variables. People got to compare how unit totals looked and such too. And look, we even did 3D year-to-date, fiscal progress charts. These were exciting for us. These all actually were in place starting in fiscal 2016. And, from feedback and such, we also knew that we needed to talk about what percentage we are along the way, et cetera. So this is the before, this is where we started from. And we're going to look at some after. I know it's really hard sometimes when we go to these sessions when we don't see what the main attraction is until like much later. Well, you're going to see that main attraction in the demo, but here is a sneak peek. All right, these are charts that we were able to produce in Tableau, as Francesca said earlier. And we really dug into Tableau's ability to present data visually. And they just make things so much easier for people to grasp and understand. And we can feed them like the insights that they want immediately, as opposed to, you know, pulling out the calculator, as we said in the title of the session. So we'll talk more about this, but let's go into a little bit about the purpose and the background behind, you know, the impact also behind these dashboards. Nancy McKinney, I'd like to introduce Nancy McKinney. She is our Associate Vice Chancellor for Advancement Operations in UDAR. And she's also, you know, the main sponsor for our dashboard. And on top of that, she's an adept user of many of our reporting tools. So she's been a great advocate for a lot of the work that we do. And Nancy's going to share, you know, background and impact of these dashboards. Nancy?
Thank you, Tam. I'm so happy to be with all of you this morning. I want to apologize for my lighting. My overhead light in my home office went out, and I have purchased a replacement bulb on Amazon, and it's apparently on a container ship somewhere. So I'm, you know, making do with my little halo light over here, which currently isn't really doing the job. Thank you to Tam and Jake for inviting me to join you this morning. So by way of background, this is really part of a large culture shift in the advancement community at Berkeley, which isn't just about UDAR, it's about all the campus units where there are embedded fundraising and alumni relations programs. And, you know, a shift towards data-driven management of people and programs. The first significant change, which Tam's team was also instrumental in driving, was focused on fundraiser metrics and the management of teams of fundraisers, so that fundraising managers had an understanding of what their individual fundraisers were assigned to do and the progress they were making as we went through the year on getting out there, talking to donors, having those visits, soliciting gifts, and then the results of those solicitations in terms of you know, whether or not donors committed to and ultimately made gifts. We then shifted focus to the overall results. How much are we raising? What's it for? Who's giving? And are we raising the bar in a number of different ways and at all levels of giving in support of Berkeley? You may have heard that last year was our second most successful fundraising year for Berkeley, with the previous year representing our all-time record. And so it's been, you know, critically important to understand really what is driving that change in bottom line results. There are many components to fundraising. I know that some of you on the call this morning know this well, but, you know, some fundraisers work with, let's say, alumni donors who give a few $100s a year for decades and then may ultimately leave an estate gift. Others work with philanthropists who may have no other attachment to Berkeley other than a philanthropic interest, whose first and, you know, sometimes, but hopefully not only gift is a $10 million gift in support of a specific program on the campus. So we were really challenged in the past when we just had that green bar graph. And I think I called it the green bar graph because green means money, even though the bars were blue. But, when we only had that, it was really hard to parse out what's really going on across that broad spectrum of fundraising activity. So the integrated reporting you're going to learn more about really offers something for everyone, no matter what type of fundraising you work in, no matter which unit on the campus you do that work for, no matter, whether you're in UDAR or embedded in a program on the campus. It's also one source of truth. Over time, people would come to Berkeley having worked at other institutions where maybe things were defined a little differently in terms of how you counted things. So people would kind of make up, because they had the raw data and had their calculators, they might kind of make up their own totals and their own, thinking about what their results for their unit were. With this, we have truly one source of truth, but the ability to answer most questions. So as you did see on the green bar graph, the upward trend in Berkeley's fundraising results isn't new, but in the past, we've really been challenged to easily answer questions about the drivers, to really understand where the change is coming from. Now they are really easy to understand, and this makes us more credible and confident when we report out to campus leaders, to our volunteer leadership, and to our donors. So with that, I'm going to turn things back to Tam and Jake. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. I really appreciate that. So we're going to get right into some of the details now. Nancy set up the stage with business purpose. So as you can see, the legacy reports and the new dashboards all were meant to answer the same question. They were meant, to allow our fundraising leaders and our campus leaders to answer some very important questions about how we were raising funds through philanthropy. So how we did this, though, and how we delivered it were definitely at issue. And in the old legacy reports, there were 7 separate either crystal reports or business object reports. People had to know where to go to find them and, run each of them separately. And now we have one dashboard. There's a lot of tabs in that one dashboard, but it's all in one place, and they can filter things and look at various, variables through those funds in one place. We're still answering the same business questions. The audience is pretty much the same. In terms of frequency of use, this is produced by my team once a month as the official totals, and we share it via an email to the whole advancement community. But they were available in both cases. They are available for ad hoc runs. Tableau makes it nicer because we have subscriptions, and so people could actually hone in on their own unit and then subscribe and get either weekly or monthly or whatever frequency they want. So that's been really nice. And that speaks to self-service too. We've always focused on self-service, but now it's even more so, right? Tableau, you'll see when I do the demo, Tableau is just amazing. It allows us to do a whole lot more and make it much more useful to people. For data source, we're still using the same data source. We have a CADS data warehouse. CADS is our advancement data systems, and we've pre-aggregated a lot of stuff, so it makes our reporting zip quite a bit. And we've standardized our approach to campaign reporting. So it makes things consistent as we apply, these metrics across different reports, across environments even, right? But with Tableau, we did translate that set of, the giving data into a Tableau giving data set. That made it much easier in Tableau. And then the applications, as you can see. All right. So getting into how we thought about making these changes. We observed people using these reports. It's so important to get out there. And what I like to do is when someone actually, submits a request for help on getting some type of data and there's an existing report that can help them do it, I will try to find the time often, just sit down with them and say, here, let's go through this together. And what's your question? Let's see how we can answer it together. And that's how we discover how people use it. And you see the big, icon of the calculator on the right side. It used to be, I would sit with someone with the reports and they would pull out the calculator because they always want to know what percentage increase, was happening. And then they would dig into it and say, well, what's behind this? And then I would have to point them to a different report, or it would be well, how do we compare year to date, by month? There were all these questions that the old reports just, they answered a lot of it, but they just didn't take it to the next level. They weren't versatile enough. So these were some of our inspirations for making the upgrade. We also kept some other things in mind. So first thing, how can we help them put away those calculators? That's just really wrong, right? And then we, in almost all of our development, we kept some things in mind, and those are our fundraising principles. There's 10 principles that we operate by, one of which, is this one Berkeley idea, and that is everything's transparent. We're accountable to each other. Any unit out there can run this report for any other unit, including their own. There's no hiding any of the information. It is just there. People can see everything. So we wanted to, that spirit runs through everything we do for the most part. And we want these things to help people take action. That's where the data-driven side of things happen. So we're always keeping those things in the back of our mind. But in addition to that, campus has diverse needs. You have big units and super successful fundraising units like engineering and the business school and LNS. And then you have really small programs. You have departments that are interested in fundraising or ORUs and such. So how do we deliver a campus standard that can scale? We're not, I wouldn't say that we've solved that problem per se, but we've really attempted to. And that's something we always keep in mind as well. And then listening to our users' feedback. We're hearing there are too many spreadsheets, there are too many reports, we don't know where to go to get this answer or that. There's been a lot of that, and we've been listening and really trying to figure out how best to deliver tools that will make sense and intuitive for people to go to, right? And then, of course, what's that key business question? And what is the next question they're going to ask? How do we answer that? That's always something we try to do as we design these dashboards. So let's go into the dashboard, and I'm going to stop sharing for a moment because I didn't set this up, but it's really quick. So I'm going into Calviz, and can I just do a quick shout out to the Calviz team, Danny Grebe, Aswan, and team who have been excellent partners in helping us manage the Tableau server sites and keeping this up. And all of the upgrades have been really helpful and amazing to us. All right, so I can share it now. So it runs pretty quickly, right? I had to search for it, so that's why it took me a little bit, but it runs pretty quickly. And it is formatted for PDF printing. I know, we can't get away from it. We're still producing things in PDF, and so this is really tightly formatted for PDF. So you can see here that we've got something like 10 tabs. We'll go through many of them. And let me get back to my notes to make sure I cover everything I want to say. All right. Simple charts are still the way to go. Things that just communicate very quickly what's going on, right? So you can see here, this is year to date compared against previous years to date, in the colors. And you've got the full fiscal years also. So you see, I mean, what Nancy was saying earlier, we've had such a trajectory, for improving our performance. We can see that. We can see how things compare during, the first quarter and half of the year. But notice also that we can't avoid the numbers. People still need the numbers. And, in order to prevent them from having to pull out their calculators, we're pre-calculating some of these percentage growth for them. And just, we sort of threw this in because it was interesting, but a heat map over how much the darker the color here represents how much money is recorded, by these months and fiscal years, et cetera. So these are just quick ways that our fundraisers can get at their information. I really love this second tab, by the way, because this was definitely where people were pulling out their calculators. And here we've just simplified things for them. We put some big numbers up that were important to them. This is the amount that we've raised in the fiscal year to date. And then a quick trend line. How does this compare? Just quickly, how does this compare year over year? And then we've got some percentages there that they could just grab and go if they needed it. Compared to the last fiscal year versus a 3-year average, because is this an upward trend, or are we seeing a blip in time, and then there's always interesting monthly comparisons. Earlier in the year, we compared to a really good July last year because there was a big gift that was recorded in July, and that didn't happen, so it looked really sad, but we're catching up. And you see that for amount at the top. We did the same for donor counts and transaction counts. So this is how many gifts and pledges have been recorded. So these were the things that our fundraisers cared about. So we put it pretty far up front. And over here, you'll see these are benefiting units. This is a lot of information, right? Not everyone cares to see all of it, but we show it in such a way that they could compare themselves if they want to. Using these filters, they could go from the top control units down to what we call areas of giving, which are more like divisional, or they could go down to the top department level. And this is really benefiting units, so it's not exactly equivalent to the org tree, but it's close enough. And so you see here, I mean, from year to year, we can show with colors up trends or down trends with the little, triangles there. And then you can also see that in a trend line on the end, right? I'll show tooltips are also an awesome thing to use to show more information, because they'll always be like, well, what's that next level of data? They can get it from the filters, but here's an easy and quick, representation of it as a tooltip too. As I'm telling you all this, I remember some feedback that we got early on from our CTO. He said, he felt overwhelmed looking at all of this. There was too much information. But then he compared it to what we had before. And he's like, you've taken everything we had before and just like leveled up, just made the interactivity and everything, the utility of it so much more. That was our intention. Truly, it is overwhelming if you don't know all this, but many of our fundraisers are used to looking at things in all these different ways. And so it was, and still is, a challenge for us to just get them kind of like familiar with the new ways of looking at this stuff. But here's another way that we've introduced. This is new. a comparison between major gifts giving versus what we call baseline giving. And major gifts is those, let's call them $1 million gifts and above, versus gifts that come in through the annual fund, the $25 phonathon gifts that come in, or the, so we break it out to let people see the sourcing of these gifts. And as Nancy said earlier, any fundraiser can see something that represents their piece of work, that brought these gifts in. So we have major gifts represented, and we have gifts less than $1 million, and others here. Again, we're always comparing prior fiscal year to 3-year average, just to let people see what the trends look like. All right, what else do I like about this one? Everywhere you're going to see the little triangles up and down, because again, people are just looking for those quick, insights that they can use to make cases or understand what's happening. So going over to giving pyramid. This is more helpful for sort of strategic analysis of the different type of work that we do in fundraising. There's major gifts, and then there's sort of like, if you think of a pipeline, right? You've got the smaller gifts that are annual gifts, and these are the smaller levels. You go to the middling type levels, and then you go to the super major and principal gifts levels. So different groups can see how their work, is panning out. And here, this shows growth over the previous year, or comparisons over the previous year. So the darker the blue is the greater the growth. The darker the red is actually the greater the decline. So this is pretty stark for people to see what's going on. And here is just a proportional breakdown of, at these giving levels, how many people are giving and how much is it, and what does it represent? Because we talk about a campaign pyramid, and usually fewer people give much bigger principal gifts, right? And then the base has more donors, but they make up much smaller gifts. So you can see it represented here pretty clearly that most of our totals are made by the bigger gifts. All right, let's see. By the way, you can notice that our colors are pretty intentional. We're trying to communicate with color. And one of the early lessons we had was that people associated colors across dashboards. So we were worried that these blues that were down here, people would associate with that blue in the previous, the giving pyramid, one that is actually a positive growth. We just, sometimes you can make decisions that people will easily, grasp and retain, and others were just like, okay, we'll try our best, but there are only a few colors that we can work with. In any case, so the next few, I won't go through all of the next few tabs, but they essentially look like this. We're looking at different variables that are important to our drivers, for fundraising, and who's giving and by how much and such is on this slide. But the concept is the same. We're using up and down indicators and trend lines to show these. All right, oh, and by the way, you see these things on every single one of the dashboards. They allow the user to download a spreadsheet of this data. I mean, you can get the full totals and not just these, high level amounts. So the people who need that granular detail can still get to it. All right, let's go to, speaking about details, people can also get to details of the granularity of the transactions in here in this tab. I'm not going to show it because it's going to have, sensitive data, so I won't go there. But Let's talk about the filters real quick, because this is sort of the control center, or it's the powerhouse here. It allows people to filter on their own units, giving to their own units. It allows them to parse things by, say, transaction source. Is it coming through online giving? Is it coming through crowdfunding? Or by purpose, where maybe a particular unit is focused on scholarships versus another unit is focused on they need more programming, funding, etc. So I won't take us through all of this, but this is super powerful. What we do here affects almost all of the previous tabs. So if someone comes in and filters this to their particular unit or their particular constituency, because you could do it by a school or unit's constituency. Also, you can see, let's say I'm Haas. I go in and then change it to Haas. I can see everyone who is my alumni, donor, prospect, friends, and where are they giving? What are they giving and where? It's really powerful tool. All right. Let's make sure And then one final thing. We are trying to do this with all of our dashboards, but we have a user guide. It's actually an embedded user guide that links to a Google Doc. So in the Google Doc, we share what this dashboard is supposed to do, some tips on navigating it, definitions and such. I'll have to be honest, we put a lot of work into this. I'm not sure how many people are using it. So this is one of those things where when questions come in, we point them to this, but we also, take their hand, walk them through things. I think that it's just going to be a combination of approaches to get people to understand what we use and how. And all right, let's see. So that was the demo. I'm going to switch back over to any questions so far? All right. So I'm going to switch over to, why is my notes not working? Okay. There we go. We had, because there were a lot of pieces to this, we actually wanted to do a distributed approach to developing it. So you can see here all of our team members who contributed to this dashboard. Loy Fernandez was the lead. He has since left us for greener pastures, and we are actually recruiting for his position. So if you're all interested, or if you know of folks who might be interested in joining our team, we are recruiting for a senior data systems analyst. I'm happy to talk to anyone if you want to reach out to me after. But sorry, I had to put that plug in. So from start to finish, we took about more than 8 months to do this, and not because it really would take that long to develop this, I think. But and to put it in context, Loy could have done this probably in 3 or 4 months, but we wanted all of our team members to get their fingers into Tableau, and it's still relatively new for us, but we wanted each team member to be assigned a particular piece, to conceptualize it, and to actually produce or develop it. And it was somewhat my way of trying to get over what I call Tableau hesitancy, because some folks look at what's done and they're intimidated. Like they go to Tableau conference, they look at the public site and they're intimidated by what people do there, because it's awesome, right? People can do some awesome things. Well, I think we all can. It just takes working with it and getting feedback and iterating. So it took longer than I think we needed to take, but it was good for a learning experience. And then we also, there was some timing issue, right? We didn't want to roll that in the middle of the year, so we waited for the start of a fiscal year to do it. All right. So I'm going to turn this over now to Jake. He's going to cover the development process and the challenges and lessons learned that we had through this through that process. Jake.
Thanks, Tam. Just quick introduction. I'm Jake Tolbert. I work on Tam's team and UDAR's information strategy and analytics team. Like Tam mentioned, I was not the lead developer on this. Loy was, but I was one of the people who was working on different things, and I'll talk a little bit about how that worked in a second. But first, I want to just kind of cover this is sort of our high level development process. Really, whenever we approach any dashboard, really the first thing we do is sit down, gather requirements, okay, figure out, what are we trying to accomplish? Not only what are we trying to accomplish, what's the key question, but then also what are the sort of non-negotiables that we have to make sure we get in there. Once we have that list, we try to draft a business requirements document, and that spec document almost always starts off as a very rough draft. We kind of a bare bones rough draft, and we end up backfilling a bunch of that spec with, oh, this is how we need to calculate this particular thing. This calculation is really confusing. Let's document that in the spec so that a year from now we can look back and say, oh, that's why we did that. That's why we made this choice. Trying to do those things ahead of time is often really difficult. And we've really, again, this is like Tam mentioned with the Tableau hesitancy. We find ourselves not writing specs at all because we're like, I don't know what to write. And so we don't write a spec at all. And then we get into it. And then a year later, we're like, I don't know why we made this choice. So we found really drafting that business requirements document, drafting that spec, and then backfilling it later with the nitty gritty details has been really useful for us in terms of doing that. And that's certainly the same thing that we've done here. Starting with that spec, we had the business requirements ahead of time because we had those green bar charts, right? We knew what we needed to accomplish. We knew what the non-negotiables were because we'd been doing this suite of reports for 4 or 5 years now, and we knew we had to replace that suite of reports, but then we wanted to upgrade it in some way. So what that suite of reports accomplished was really the start of that business requirements, and then we began to fill in the pieces. So the way we accomplished this, and I think I'm going to talk a little bit, Tam, if you could go to the next slide, to talk a little bit about how we did this distributed development piece. So distributed development in Tableau is not an easy process. It's not because a Tableau document is usually a combination of the Tableau document itself plus the data. It all kind of gets mishmashed, and so doing kind of the typical development process where you have a version control system and everybody's checking stuff out and checking pieces back in just doesn't really work very well in Tableau. What we did instead, Lloyd built a framework document. So again, once we had that business requirements set, he roughed out a framework document he said, okay, we're going to use this data set, which was a published data set on Tableau server on Calviz. We're going to use that for sure, and we're going to start with this piece. And then he saved that document on a shared drive. And then each of us made a copy of that document, built our specific tab, and then resaved that. And then Lloyd went in, and you can actually copy and paste a whole dashboard and from one workbook to another in Tableau. And so that's what Lloyd did. He would go in and he would copy this dashboard that I built, paste it into the new document, and that got him 80% of the work. The rest of the 20% was looking at the variables that I used, and did those match up with the variables that someone else on the team used and maybe just named slightly differently, and can we combine those two and use those two in the same place, so that way, again, a year, 2 years from now, when we go to make a change, we don't have to make the change in 6 different places. We only have to make it in one place. So that was really our process, was each one of us would build something, Lloyd would copy and paste it into the the canonical document, and then do some cleanup to really pull things together. And that ended up working pretty well. A little messy, a little complicated. And of course, the real mess, of course, is that the human interaction piece, right? Like there's 6 of us working on one document, trying to coordinate all those things. And you're going to get that in any team. So we handled that pretty well as a team to get that going. So the next slide, I think we're going to talk a little bit about the data. So this one of our big challenges, and Tam's talked about this in the past. One of the big challenges we have is how do we enable that flexibility so that not only do we get we need 5 years of data because we want to show those long-term trends, right? If we just take the last year, 2 years, we can't even do a 3-year average. Like we need that 5 years of data so we can do a little bit of historical look. We can do long-term trends. How are we doing on that? And just that alone, we're talking about what, 500,000 rows of giving data. And then we need to figure out how do we make this document flexible enough that we can filter by lots of different things, so that somebody who's reporting campus-wide can report on it, but also somebody in the English department can do the same kind of reporting. And so that means we're going to have a lot of dimensions, which ends up giving us a bunch of columns. So that, we ended up, you can see, we ended up with something like 60 columns and over almost 600,000 rows. So we're not talking about big data in the, capital B, capital D, big data, but we're not talking about small data either. We're talking about the kind of data that's just annoying enough that saving it on your desktop is going to be a pain. So that was really certainly a challenge, was trying to figure out how do we do that. We originally thought maybe we can summarize some things, maybe we can build summaries and as soon as we start building those summaries, then the smaller units get left out and they can't do those things. So we need to build those summaries on the dashboard level so that when someone comes in, they can choose whatever set of filters they want and get the data that they need. And speaking of filters, this is really I think really the most challenging piece, was not so much the question of what filters do we put in, but how do we make those filters consumable and not overwhelming? There are a lot of things here, and certainly I expect that most of you, being not familiar with like the specific work of fundraising, look at this and say, oh my gosh, what, like, I don't know what, because you're not, there's so much going on here that it's hard to know what's going on. So the first thing we did was we categorized them by type. So you can see we've got, donor attributes. So this is who's giving the gift. So these are filters that are just about that. Benefiting units. So who's getting the gift? And those 3 filters are just about that. The transaction attributes are what these things are specific to that specific gift. So we've really purposely categorized things, tried to make really clear headers so that they would be clear. It would be clear about what's going on. Tableau also has a really useful feature where you can say show relevant values only. So for example, the summary area of giving, if we chose letters and science, then in the area of giving and department filters, we would, from that point on, once we've already made that filter choice, we'd only see departments and areas of giving that were in letters and science. We wouldn't have to sort through everything in engineering to try to find what we were looking for. And that helps a lot with clarity in terms of, especially when the user doesn't know, I'm not sure what it is I'm looking for. What is it? Where does psychology fit? Is it at the area giving level? Is the department? I'm not sure. So hopefully they can, really cascade down and do that sort of thing. The problem with having this many filters is that once you get all those filters applied the way that you really want them to be, it's often hard to remember where you were at, or worse, if you've exported a PDF. You set this up so that you get a PDF every week into your inbox, you save those, and your boss comes to you and says, hey, what what did this look like a year ago? And so you go sort through your inbox and you pull out a filter a year ago and you show it to them and they say, that's not what it looks like right today. And then there's this moment of confusion. Like, what on earth have we done? And why don't the numbers match? Why doesn't things line up? With that in mind, Tam, the next slide, I think, shows what we did to try to mitigate this. So below the filter section, underneath all those filters, we basically laid out what it is you have selected, with the idea that this PDF, when you export it to PDF, you're going to get this page. So a year and a half from now, you can look through and say, oh, I changed the dates and we changed this. That particular PDF was for this specific use case. So with that in mind, hopefully that brings some clarity to what people have done so that they're not stuck with, these numbers don't make any sense, but I don't know what I did. That's really the goal here. We also did that, I think, in the next slide shows on the bottom of each of the tabs that Tam showed, down in the footer, we kept this really small because it's not really important until you need it. But down here at the very bottom is a summary of the filters that you've made, so that you can see, again, the same sort of thing. You can immediately look at that PDF, that email, that screenshot that someone took of a presentation and say, oh, they had this filtered on this specific date range. That's why the numbers look really small, is because they were only looking at July or whatever it is. So hopefully that we're hoping that is really going to minimize a bunch of those kind of questions that I think we've all received of, my numbers don't line up, I don't know what I did. And then you don't know how to help the person because they clearly selected something and nobody knows what it was or how the data was first generated. So that was so getting through those filters, I think that was really one of our biggest challenges. And again, those aren't technical challenges per se. Those are really UI design, sort of human challenges. Which I think on something where that's sort of as broad and sprawling as this suite of reports really can be, those can be really tricky ones. Some other challenges that we fought with, because we're looking at this, because there's such a broad scope, there's a lot of chances for confusion. Tam talked about the sparklines here that you can see, the little line charts, and the color at the end of each dot. It was really difficult. We really struggled with what we should be comparing against. When we first thought about this, when we first spec'd it out, we said, okay, let's calculate the slope of these sparklines. And let's say let's just calculate, we'll have an invisible slope and we'll say, is the dot above the slope or down? So are we trending up or are we trending down? Are we on an upward trajectory or are we on a downward trajectory? What's going on? That seems like a great idea. In fact, I think it's a really useful idea. However, it becomes really confusing when, for example, if you look at the Cal Alumni Association line, you can imagine where the slope of that line is probably going down. But this year we're up over last year. So we're up almost 20% over last year. So immediately, as soon as you see those, you think, oh, we're up. Why is the line, the invisible slope line is tending, why is it what? Every time we did it, we got ourselves confused. We would show it to people, they would give us feedback. They would be confused. We would try to explain it. We would get confused. And so we finally just settled on, let's just call it the dot compared to last year. It's a little bit less useful. It tells you a little bit less about what's going on in the data, but it's so much easier to explain. It's so much easier to remember what's going on. And you can look at the chart and you can immediately figure out what's happening. Like, it's immediately clear. I see what that dot means. Reducing that cognitive load, I think, is really key to making dashboards successful, because we don't want people to spend their time trying to figure out what the dashboard's telling them. We want them to start spending their time figuring out what to do about what the dashboard's telling them. You know, what does it mean that Cal Alumni Association is up 20% over last year? You know, and what should we do because of that? That's where we want them to spend their mental energy, not on, wait a second, what does this mean? If they're asking the question, the what does this mean question, it means we haven't done our jobs as report writers really well. So simplifying that takes away a little bit of the information, but I think it's a great trade-off in terms of reducing the amount of thinking that folks have to do about that. The other place where we really struggle with this sort of cognitive load problem was the giving summary by area of giving page, because there are filters for benefiting unit and donor attributes, right? So remember, this donor attributes set of filters is all about who gave the money, and the benefiting unit set of filters is all about where's the money going. So let's say you change this donor attributes and you set it like here to business. But if you set it to business, it could still show lots of units in this list, because a business alum could give, they don't have to give the business, right? Like they graduated, they got a job at Google. Now they love going to the art museum. So they're going to continue giving to Berkeley Art Museum. So we really wrestled with how do we make this clear? And we really settled on, let's focus in on those filter headers. Let's make it clear what those filter headers are filtering on. And let's do the same thing with the titles here. So giving by summary of area of giving. How do we make sure that it's clear that this is where the money is going? That area of giving is jargon that we use in UDAR to really say area of giving is where the money goes. So hopefully we're using that language clearly to really make it clear. Yes, you filtered by alumni of business, but this is where they're giving to, and to take away that confusion. So those are kind of the cognitive load pieces that we dealt with. If we look at the next slide, we can talk about kind of high level lessons. So what we learned, kind of things that we can take away from this. The first thing is that proper version control doesn't really work very well. Like a traditional software development approach to Tableau is probably right out. But we can if we do some good groundwork ahead of time, we can do some distributed development. We can share the load across the team. The other thing that I think we already knew is that Tableau is really good at data visualization. It's really easy to make some really beautiful charts that look really good, that are appealing, that are both eye-catching and informative. And that's what we really want. We want people to remember this and think about, okay, that's the report that Tam sends out that has the yellow and blue bars in the front. That's where I go to answer this particular question. We want to associate those visual ideas with the sort of data analysis ideas. And Tableau is really good too about simple filtering, making it easy to do simple filtering so that you focus in on a couple things really quickly. Things that Tableau doesn't do well, complex filtering and UI design. I would give a shiny nickel for the ability to, if I made this choice and this filter, then and only then did this filter appear. And there are ways to hack that together in Tableau, but there's not a good way to do really good UI design in a sort of web 2.0, the sort of stuff that we see online on a web page where controls appear or disappear based on what you're doing. That you're presented with the options that you really you need only when you get to that certain spot. There's just not a good way to do that in Tableau, which is why we have that giant filter page, right? The other thing that Tableau doesn't really do very well is big text-based crosstabs. So dumping out big spreadsheets, Tableau is just not It's not Excel. It's not a spreadsheet generation tool. And when you start trying to do that, things bog down really quickly. I don't know if you noticed when Tam was giving the demo, she's like, well, I'm not going to go to the details page. A big choice of that was for confidentiality, but the other big choice was if she clicked on that page, it was going to spin for a long, long time because she would have to load 500,000 rows. And that's not the kind of performance and user experience that we want to give our users. So Tableau is not great at generating those kind of spreadsheets. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about this. And in a second, I'm going to transition to Tam and let her talk more about this idea too. But really dealing with permissions and sharing outside of UDAR, those kinds of things is really a challenge. This dashboard is saved on Calviz. It's published on Calviz and updates on a regular basis. But the permissionings in Calviz is just, Tableau server does not have a complex permissions model. It's got a good permissions model, but not a great permissions model. And at a place as complex as Berkeley, we probably need something really, really great that Tableau just doesn't offer. And so that's really been a challenge to try to figure those things out. I don't know, Tim, do you want to say more about that?
Yeah, let me just switch to the next slide. I'll finish what you just said about that. We're still grappling with it. I mean, we push this report out monthly at month close, and it's a PDF, but in that email that I send out the PDF with, I include a link to this dashboard. And there are some folks who I send this to in California Hall and elsewhere who aren't fundraisers. They're not a part of the advancement community, but they'd love to have access, and so we've gotten some of them access, but we basically had to twist ourselves into pretzels to do it. And if they were really savvy, they would know how to get to Calviz and see everything else too, not just this dashboard that we're allowing them to see. So it's not optimal. So we're still hoping to figure that out. But I wanted to also talk about the other challenge, which is, you produce something like this, and hopefully many of your users will be excited to use it, and many of them are. But how do you help them understand what they're looking at? How do you help them use it? So we have established what we call dashboard discovery sessions. And Zoom's been awesome for this, by the way, because, like this session, we can record it, and those who can't make it can, view it later. But we've done staff run versions of these when we roll out new dashboards, and we sometimes do kind of like we revisit some of them once in a while. But this is a great way to get peers to present to their peers. We find the champions. We find the people who really love using. You'll see in a subsequent slide. Well, actually, you won't see in that slide, but we have usage, usage dashboard. We can see who's using it most. And when I go talk to them, they're happy to share how and why and what they're doing, in these tools. And when we can get them to come talk to their peers, it's a much stronger statement. It helps others understand, here's the business use for it. And, oh, I can answer that question too. And here's, how this can help shape, what I'm doing in my strategy, et cetera. So these have been useful. The user guides we want to embed just really for us to understand too what these things are, because we're producing a lot of them and it can get confusing over time. What definitions are, how to use it, what we meant for it to do. So those are good for our users, but also for us. And then I'm still telling my team, we need to do one-on-one support when people need it. If they're asking a question and they really want to get into it, teach them how to fish, right? Sitting down, working with them, seeing how they use it, hearing the questions they have. That's been just really invaluable to us as we iterate and continue to enhance these reports. Here's what I was talking about. We have a usage dashboard. This is not the full thing. I only took a small slice of it just so you could see the trend for use for this one since we launched it in July. But, you know, it looks like the trend's going down, but I do want to tell you that when we launched it, everybody clicked in, right? And everybody looked at it. So that was awesome. And as the time grew by, we're seeing like maybe only 70 in the last month close. But that's not actually a horrible number because there are only about 35, maybe 35 to 50 fundraising units, major fundraising units across campus. And if I can see that that number stays about 50 to 70, that shows me that those particular units care and are, and I can tell who's using it, by the way. But so we'll keep an eye on this, and should there be, like some of our other dashboards, we see trends going down and we try to figure out why. Some of them it's because we've produced a different tool that does whatever that first one did better. So we're cannibalizing some of our own work, but that's okay. We can retire things, or we can change them and make them more useful, right? So it's really good to keep an eye on what we've been producing. So I think that I'm going to close it there and switch it over to questions.
Thank you so much, Tam and Jake. That was fantastic. And I'm sure there's a lot of questions and comments. I want to invite everybody. You're welcome to type things into the chat, or if you want to unmute, I may have to ask to unmute, so you can do that. Tam, do you mind unsharing your slides just so we can see the gallery? Thank you. Janata, have questions or comments come in over the course of the meeting?
I'm just gonna let people, like this was an incredible amount of information. So I feel like, we'll okay. So I have Greg on the line who's raising a question. Greg.
Hi. Well, first I want to thank Tam and Jake for coming on because I work in the fundraising world for Haas, leading a team similar to what Tam leads at Haas. I connected my fundraising data viz community to the CAN community. I'm really happy the two communities came together for this presentation. So this is great. And we're working on developing similar reports. And there's one question I have, and this comes up often whenever we present data to our associate dean for development or other folks. When you have gifts that span areas of giving, let's say an endowed chair in environmental entrepreneurship, right? That might be in CNR and Haas or some multidisciplinary institute. How does that get reflected in the area of giving total? Is it 50-50 or whatever the terms of the fund are, or like,
Yes.
How does that show up? So when we say totals and someone says, no, but I thought we raised 5 million this year. We're like, yeah, but 4.5, $500,000 was for this endowed chair that somebody else has,
It's a great question, Greg. We have to design our data in a special way to get at this. And we do look at it in what we call our allocation-based view, which is if a gift came in, $5 million gift came into a fund, we will count in that view, the whole 5 million went to that fund. But you're talking about how do we represent it as what came to a unit. And this is all kind of crediting that we're talking about, because we don't really know how that money gets split out when it actually hits budgets, right? But in the allocation tables, there's a place where benefiting units, beneficiaries, is called the beneficiaries table. And we can record there what percentage goes to which benefiting unit. And we use that to then calculate how to apportion, what part of that 5 million went to business versus what part of it went to engineering or something like that. And that's the view or perspective that we're reporting on in this in this view. Of course, people will question, well, why didn't the whole, the whole 5 million went to my fund? Yes, it did. So how it ends up in your funds is one way, but this is, you know, how we report just crediting of the giving.
Thank you so much. There is a question from Danny. How have the dashboards impacted ad hoc data request needs?
Jake, you can probably chime in on this because you actually watched the queue. I would say that a lot of this stuff was already self-service before. We just upgraded it quite a bit.
Yeah, I think that's an accurate assessment. A lot of our ad hoc kind of data requests tend to be contact mailing listy. Like, oh, I just realized we need to send out a list to so-and-so to invite them to this event, which this dashboard doesn't necessarily solve that problem. You know, there's not any contact information in here. So we don't, I don't feel like there's been a significant impact on that question. Certainly on our team, there's been a big flurry of, oh, so-and-so asked this analysis question. I bet I can answer that with this dashboard. Can I answer that with this? You know, it's like, it's a new enough tool even for us that we're constantly saying, wait, can I answer that with this dashboard? I'm gonna go in and play with it and see if I can. And sometimes the answer is yes, and sometimes the answer is no, but if we fix this one problem, I'll bet we could solve that. So.
And I'll just add that this is where I take the opportunity to reach out to that person asking the question and say, here, let me show you how we can answer it using this tool.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Great question though.
Mm-hmm.
And that was exactly my follow-up, but Tam anticipated it. So yeah, what do you do when you know how to answer it?
I'm also okay. So I'm gonna let Malcolm also answer his question, and then I'll ask my question. Malcolm. Mm-hmm.
Oh, hey, sorry, I actually have a question. Did I hear correctly that you guys are able to share this dashboard outside of Calendar? And how?
No.
How did you do?
No. We share to other users on campus, a very select few other users outside of the advancement community. So we share, you know, like I said earlier, with some folks in California Hall. They all have CalNet, they do. And Danny's team can talk more about,
thank you.
Yeah, Danny's team can talk more about the public site, because there's the Calviz, you know, internal, and then there's a Calviz public. So if you do want to produce a version that you can put up, you know, on a public website or something like that, we've done this. Our campaign total, we have a version of the campaign dashboards sitting so that those who are not CalNet authenticated can actually see them. But of course, with that, we produce a much, you know, more edited version than the one we consume internally.
Okay, well, if may I use my my privileges and ask, and first of all, tell how amazing it's been to hear, like, your process and how you work with the users, and you know, you constantly iterate and just, you know, like, you use every question as an opportunity to, you know, to keep you know, improving, meeting you know, the needs better. So I wanted to see if, you know, since you've launched this dashboard, if you had an inkling of how this is helping, you know, how this is helping better fundraise. I don't know, maybe that's a big question, but, like, you know, I would be curious at how your dashboard affected, you know, the fundraising efforts.
I don't know if Nancy wants to chime in too, but I could say that people are asking different questions about their operations. And they're focusing in on things like, giving at certain levels, or giving from certain sources, or things that they couldn't get at. I mean, things that were there before, but they couldn't easily get at, they're now looking at it. Nancy, what have you seen?
I would also add that, as we got ready for the launch of the public phase of the campaign, which took place in February of 2020, we have a consulting firm that serves as campaign counsel. And we had them do an assessment of our frontline fundraising staff as far as, how many and the capacity to do the work, given the opportunity that they saw in our prospect database. Like, do we have enough fundraisers to raise all the money we hope to raise in the campaign? And one of the outcomes of that assessment was, focusing in on the fact that frontline fundraisers at Berkeley were spending a greater proportion of their time doing things other than fundraising than at other institutions. So, I would say that this work and these tools, along with other steps that we've taken, have been aimed at freeing up fundraisers so that they can spend as much of their time doing actual fundraising activities. So I think it fits in with that too. So I think it's helped with our, if you want to call it, staffing capacity as well.
Wow, that's incredible. That's amazing. That's an amazing insight.
Well, I just want to honor everybody's time. I did want to say one thing that did come through the chat. I just want to give Alfred had mentioned, as you were describing the process, how meaningful it was that you chose to take longer so that the team could be involved rather than do it like one expert does it at a time. And I love seeing things like that. And then the final products are so wonderful. I mean, it's just like diverse teams in action, right? We have living proof that this is why. And the cross training, I really appreciate that part. And a lot of the technical stuff, I just was bowing to your greatness that you were able to do it. But this is one I could take back to my unit and start to replicate today. And so I love moments like that when colleagues share their work. And I want to say to all of you here, if you loved today's presentation, and I hope you did, Tam and Jake will be back with us in March. They will be doing a CAN session about more of their work. And so I hope you'll join us then. But in the meantime, if you can, everybody can join in thanking our presenters for a wonderful presentation. And yeah, you're welcome to stick around for a few more minutes if you just want to hang, but otherwise, I wish you all a happy rest of the Friday weekend and last day of fall semester, yay. So